Oh, are we live? Yes, we are. Anin Kinaweo. Anishna, how is everybody? Nice to see you. So excited. Tonight's a big night. Unfortunately, my big homie Jesse, well, our big homie Jesse, he's preparing. He's got a lot of things getting ready for the big competition on Canada Reads. So unfortunately, he can't make it this evening. But I have the pleasure of hosting Homies with three other homies. They are a part of the team. They've been working behind the scenes. You've seen Tanya a few times, but yeah, I'm gonna bring up my co-host for this evening for the panel. We have the wonderful Kim Wheeler. I'm actually going to be taking over a lot of Kim's duties this evening. So if there's questions, please put them in the comments, and I'm the one that's going to go through them. We have the amazing Tanya Talaga. Welcome, Tanya.
Bazoo, bazoo.
And we have the wonderful Jolene Banning. On in. Anishna,
Hello.
how are you?
Good. I'm excited. It's a little nerve-wracking being on the other side of the camera. Or the computer, I should say.
Yeah. Hey, Kim, how's your week been so far?
It's been good. It's been really busy. Lots is happening in my house. So I'm actually at my daughter's apartment where you can see it's pretty low lighting. There's been thunderstorms all afternoon. So if I suddenly drop out, that means we lost power.
Okay.
It's typical res internet over here.
Yeah. Tanya, how's your week going?
Bazoo. It's been busy, it's been really busy. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I'm working like nonstop. A lot of writing, lots going on, and really excited too because we have, of course, our new project as well with Homies. We've got our Sunday edition. The Nish Dish on Sundays, Sunday morning at 10 a.m. And so getting that up and running too. It's been a good week. Good week. Yeah.
Right on. Jolene, how's where are you broadcasting from, and how's your week been?
Well, I'm broadcasting from my home territory, Fort William First Nation, Namkiwaju. I'm right out close to the bay, Burleigh Bay here, and my week has just been live and lively. It's been action-packed, I feel, with the new edition of the Sunday Edition, and I love it. Yeah.
It's been so much fun. Just even
crazy.
Conversing with you guys on like once a week, at least once a week. And I'm just so excited to share this with you and be able to chat and talk this evening. So I'm actually gonna my background is definitely not in media or journalism. So I'm kind of gonna take the back seat, and I'm gonna let Tanya take the driver's seat and introduce our guests.
Miigwech. We'll see you soon, Ian. See you soon. Yeah. Don't go far. Don't go far.
I won't go far. I'm actually gonna hang out I'm gonna hang out, but I'm gonna go mute and just pay attention.
Okay. Good. All right. So let's bring our guests in. See, Ian, can you do that for me? Awesome. Oh, okay. Our first guest. Oh, there's Candis Callison and there's Brandi Morin. All right, so I'm just going to welcome everyone to this edition of Homies. This is a really cool edition of Homies because this is an edition where we're talking about journalism. We're talking about the media, and what's really cool about tonight is that we are all Indigenous women. Now, Indigenous women, believe it or not, are a rarity in the mainstream media, but in the reality of, communities and homes and social media and also the non-mainstream media, we are out here and we are growing stronger and stronger every single day. There's more and more of us. And I wanted to introduce our incredible panel tonight. I am going to start with Brandi. Brandi Morin is a stranger to none of you. If you are on social media, if you're on Facebook, if you watch Al Jazeera, listen to Al Jazeera, she is everywhere. The Observer, She is French Canadian and Cree Iroquois journalist in the Treaty 6 area. And she works so hard for all of our communities. You know, I can't say enough good things about the journalism that Brandi does. She's just amazing. And I love your work. You're tireless. You never stop. You know, you drag your family members with you too, which is what I do. And I think all female Indigenous journalists do that. Just recently, I saw you in Wet'suwet'en. I think you were on Instagram and your daughter was in the background. And I was like,
Yes.
the best, the
I'm
best.
teaching her the ways.
That's awesome. It's awesome. And of course, we have Candis Callison. Candis is an associate professor at the University of British Columbia's Journalism School. She is jointly appointed, actually, in the School of Journalism, Writing and Media, and the Institute for Critical Indigenous Studies. She is the author of many books, actually. How Climate Change Comes to Matter, The Communal Life of Facts, and she is also co-author of a book that is creating a ton of buzz right now. And she is co-author of this book with Mary Lynn Young. And that book is Reckoning, Journalism's Limits and Possibilities. I just have to take a moment because I can't say enough good things about Candis. And Candis has many times introduced me at events where we've had to stand in front of lots and lots of people, mostly non-Indigenous people. And she's gone on stage and said incredible things about me. And I just have to repay the favor because you, Candis, are somebody who's paved the way for all of us. You are of my age bracket. And you,
That's right,
I know, you started a show at CTV, which was like one of the very first Indigenous news shows. And you went on to CBC. And now you're a professor. You take on a lot of the big subjects and a lot of the big guys. And you do so with courage. And so I just have to lift my hands up to you because you are an awesome friend and I love you dearly. And yes, that's our panel today. I'm sorry, I'm gonna stop gushing about our awesome panelists, but I love them all. And of course I love Kim and Jolene too. I mean, you guys have no idea how much work everybody does behind the scenes, and it's all, except for our 23 Patreon members, we're all volunteer. You know, it's just like, and we love this. And why we do this is because we want to give back to the community and we want to tell our stories our way. That's why we're here.
Yes.
Yeah. And also why we are here tonight is to talk about something that we are really quite familiar with as all Indigenous women in the media. And that is diversity. Who gets to cover Canada? Who gets to cover Turtle Island, and why, I would say. And, you know, a lot of things kickstarted this discussion that we're having here tonight. And I know it's like a lot of people are having panels on this, you know, a lot of organizations are having panels on what's going on. This has all come about in many ways, this discussion now, due to Black Lives Matter, due to Indigenous Lives Matter, due to the demonstrations that we've been seeing on the streets, people asking, well, you know, why aren't we learning more? Why don't we know more? Who is representing us and who is telling our stories? And with that thought in mind, I want to talk about and get everyone's thoughts about something that also helped kickstart this discussion or got us to where we are today. And that's on Twitter a while ago, the news came out about CBC on-air personality who used the N-word at a meeting. Now, she used this word in a story meeting, and she was disciplined and pulled off for the last few episodes of her show, The Weekly. And that kicked off a lot of discussion that we were already having, that a lot of people are already having, and that is who represents us and why. So I want to get your thoughts. I know this is a big question, but I want to broadly get your thoughts on why we're talking about this now and why we didn't talk about this 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 20 years ago. And I'm going to ask, I don't know, I feel like, do I get to pick somebody to answer this question? Or there's someone
I feel like I want to go first because like I feel that Candis is gonna have like this big brain, like that's gonna give me this huge
That's a very
epiphany,
big brain.
and then I'll be like, oh, I should have went before her. So just, you know, like I don't think we were having these conversations 5, 10, 15 years ago because there wasn't, you know, one, there wasn't enough of us working in the mainstream, right? Secondly, you know, like once you get into the mainstream, and I've worked at the Edmonton Journal and the Canadian Press, Broadcast News, and CBC Radio, you're afraid to speak up. You're afraid to make waves and make change. And for the longest time, you know, I didn't speak up, and I just kind of, you know, did the stories that were assigned to me. And then I got to a point, well, it was actually when I turned 40. So like a decade ago, when I was like, you know what, life is too short. I've already been in this industry since I was 23 or so. And it's time to start speaking up and taking a stand and saying what's wrong with this industry to the people who I had believed were willing to stand beside me and up for me and help make those changes on management levels. And while some of those, you know, some of those small changes did happen, like closing the comments at CBC and capitalizing Indigenous, when it came to making real change and promoting Indigenous people up to senior levels, that wasn't happening. At least it wasn't happening for me. I think that part of it was that I was not the yes person. I was not the yes person that they wanted. Had I been the yes person, had I not rocked the boat, had I not said things, you know, perhaps my career at CBC would have went differently.
Brandi, what do you think?
Well, I've kind of been making my own way. I mean, I left those institutions because they were too constraining. And I took a really big risk. I had a permanent, full-time, comfy, cushy position with CBC Indigenous. And I was so elated to be there because they had, a vision to tell our stories and have our own people tell our stories. But even within that, they were still under the umbrella of this corporation, and I was still restrained with what I wanted to do. And so I had to get out, and it was risky. I didn't know what my future held, right? And so I had to create that path. But I can relate to what Kim's saying about how she felt, boxed in and confined and maybe even afraid, because that's your livelihood. And I think times, because we're at a different place. I think that there was people ahead of me that have helped pave that way for us to, I guess, have a little bit more room to feel safer to make these decisions, to branch out, but it's still a risk. But I'm still I'm still working within the mainstream media. I'm doing it on a freelance basis, so I'm calling the shots with what stories that I want to tell. And it's incredible, and more of us need to be in this place.
Wow. Jolene?
Yeah, I can totally relate to what you said, Kim, because I myself was in a position of having secured employment and being on air, but also admin, doing other jobs. And so even though I was an on-air personality and wanting to do more and, you know, having this plan about how I'm going to like grow as a journalist and grow as a storyteller, being told like, no, like, sorry, there's no opportunities. You just have fun with what you're doing with the column. It's just for fun, you know, like not being taken seriously as having a voice or having a story. And I remember like so many times, like just feeling just sad. And my husband just saying, you know what, like, just you just have to do it, because at the time we had 2 small children and there's benefits that come with this job. And when you're raising a family, like you have to think about these things, right? Like, well, how am I going to provide for them and still take care of myself? And then all of a sudden opportunity just opens the door. Like, I just was one of the people that got cut when, you know, media often gets cut and targeted. So when I got cut, it was like, well, now I didn't have anything holding me back. And it was like, okay, well, if you want to tell the stories that you were told no to before, why don't you try other media organizations and just see what happens? And so it was like when I had nothing to lose, all of a sudden it was more liberating and freeing to be like, okay, I'm going to tell these stories. And these are the ones I want to do. I want to tell the stories that show our strength and resiliency and beauty, because that's the stories that I've seen least in mainstream media.
So true. So true. Candis, this is probably also all too familiar to you, both personally and also too through the book that you wrote.
Yeah, really familiar. Familiar to me personally, actually, just reflecting, listening to all of you. You know, when I had this national show at CTV, I also had to do a nightly column on the 6 o'clock news. And literally I worked 7 days a week, like, you know, sort of just to do the things that you want to do. And I really left, when I left television, I was pretty burnt out and went to academia. And, you know, not that academia hasn't burnt me out at times too, but the challenge of being in newsrooms where there's just so much resistance to so many of the ways in which we might approach telling stories. And at the same time, there's such an obligation to bring Native voices to the story. You know, I can't tell you how many current affairs shows I was hired on just to bring Native people onto the show, because nobody else knew who to call or where to start. You know, this is like the mid to late 90s, which, you know, some of us remember well. But, you know, when I went to do this book with my co-author, Mary Lynn Young, we end the book with an entire chapter on Indigenous journalists in the US and in Canada, because we see them as doing such transformative work, like all of you are doing and what you're doing here with this show. And, you know, the stories that you're telling are so similar to the many stories we heard from people that we talked to, and the things that we see that have pushed this conversation to where it is at. And I think we really have to look to Black journalists who have really done a lot of articulation work for us, which is hard work to do, right? I continually point to Desmond Cole, but there's many others that we can point to who are doing really solid work in explaining how it is that newsrooms don't work for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. But, you know, I think the public's having a voice on social media and having, you know, many options for information sources, I think that's one of the big pushes that has got us to the place where we're having these conversations. But I think the other thing is that journalism has been in a crisis steadily for the last 20 years, where we have constant talk about technology and economics and how all of our models are changing and how are we going to pay for this newspaper to keep it alive, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, in the midst of that, right, there's been this much more, what we argue is a profound crisis, where if you take into account all the critiques that you guys have just offered and many of the other critiques that are out there, you know, you can't not see the ways in which journalism needs to change as a practice and the way that newsrooms need to shift as well.
Why is it, you know, I can say the answer why. I know the answer why, but why has it been so tough to hire Indigenous journalists? Like, why has it been so tough to hire Indigenous journalists full time? You know, and like, Why aren't we not doing that?
The journalists that we talked to, a lot of them didn't want, like, they're similar to what Brandi's story is. It was too constricting. Like, they wanted to do other things. In other cases, Kim's story is really familiar. People want to move up, and there's not, there's a real ceiling there, and that's true for Black journalists as well. It's true, like, you look at who's in the upper executives. Affirmative action has really suited white women. They've gotten it to the higher levels, but we don't see that for people of color. We don't see that for Indigenous people. It's really, it's pretty striking when you look at the numbers, like the statistics in newsrooms, both in the U.S. and in Canada. Right? This is a continent-wide problem.
It's so true, isn't it? I mean, you have to give your head a shake and say, why is that? And the reason why. We know the reason why is racism. I mean, we can go back to the when we started in newsrooms. There's a few of us on this screen that started in the 90s, and in the 90s, people did not want to hear our stories, right? The stories right. They were just like, they're all the same story. That's what I would often hear. It's like, Chiefs ripping off somebody, or
Did you guys ever get the question from editors, like when you pitched? Because I used to pitch positive Indigenous story all the time, and told my white editors that is what I wanted to write about, was Indigenous story. And they would always ask me, aren't you afraid that you're ghettoizing yourself? And the answer was always the same: ghettoizing yourself, right? Are you afraid that if you just write Indigenous story, that nobody is going to see you as wanting to write anything else? But what they didn't understand is that Indigenous story is all encompassing, right? It's sports, it's entertainment, it's politics, it's it's feature stories. There's the sky is the limit. But they didn't. They just thought the audience wasn't going to be interested. That readers were not going to want to know about our community. And I would always say, well, what do you ask that of your political writers, or your sports writers, or your entertainment writers? That are they afraid of ghettoizing themselves? And also, if I don't care enough about my community to write about it, who's going to care enough about it?
Right.
Yeah. That's so true. Those are such powerful words. I have to say that when I started, I started off as a general assignment reporter, and you had to do everything. You had to do, crime, city politics, the local fair, and you were kind of a slave 24/7 to the assignment editor and the news desk, right? And you had no sort of choices with things, and you came forward with stories. But I always found that nobody really cared that I was Indigenous. They would look at me like, because I'm not, I could be many things. People look at me and think, oh, are you Spanish? Are you from Israel? Are you from I could be any. Are you Greek or Italian? Those are the ones I get all the time. It's like, oh, you must be, because my father was Polish, right? And so this is what you get. And it was they didn't understand. It was just like, look at me and say, oh, you're Ojibwe? Oh. And it was just like, next. There was no, but I was in Toronto, and I have to say though that Toronto, it was really, in the 90s, there was really no awareness. There wasn't a lot of awareness about First Nations issues. People weren't interested in printing them, or printing more than one of them, printing a feature story, but not a whole bunch of stories. It was actually not until like Queen's Park that I started to do more.
Or if it was one of the 4 Ds. If it was something that was going to bring in hits. If it was going to be like scandalous.
Can I share something?
Yeah.
when I was first starting to build my career, gosh, it must have been when I was working in the print industry for a couple of years, community newspaper. I was working for my local newspaper here, and I had established like a weekly feature called Aboriginal Aspects. And it was something like a way to reach out to our communities and to kind of try to help with reconciliation conversations. And like, at one point, like people were phoning into the newspaper and like wanting to boycott us and stuff because I was doing that. But there was also a lot of like amazing support, and my editor, like, he gave me that support and my freedom, and I thrived off of that, right? But he ended up leaving the paper, I don't know, about 6 months, or I think between 6 or 8 months later. They brought in a new editor, and they actually brought in like a new like publisher. And I knew everything was different when they came in. I knew something was different. You could just feel it in the atmosphere. And I wanted to continue with my, my feature that I was doing. And they just said no, they weren't going to continue, that they were, looking to focus elsewhere. And things just seemed off, And one day I was pulled into the new publisher's office, and she said, we're going to let you go because we're looking for other things. And I was let go from there. And I really believe it was because of what I was trying to do with Aboriginal Aspects, because it came out of nowhere and I was stunned. And I know that they didn't like me doing that, but I'm grateful for that now, because then not too long after that, I started working with APTN. So it opened that path to go forward. But that was only maybe in 2012-ish when that happened. So not that long ago.
Yeah. I think that, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I think that social media really opened a lot of doors to us, and people started listening more because, as we know, like, we're all savvy with digital media, right? Everyone's on Facebook all the time sharing stories. We love to share stories, like, maybe too much sometimes. And everyone's on Facebook Messenger. That's how we get a hold of everyone, how you talk to everyone. And it's, I don't know. It's, I think I Don't Know More really, really changed things too. I think it changed things in the Canadian political landscape, but also too for media. Don't you think?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's true. Yeah. I Don't Know More changed a lot. I mean, we quote Tanya Talaga in the book as saying, there was very few sort of non-racist reporting before I Don't Know More and TRC. And I think those were real game changers, but also because you really saw in what I call Indigenous publics, like Indigenous people are part of your audience. Like they are paying attention to what you're saying and doing as a journalist. They're paying attention to what kind of legislation you want to like it was sort of this moment, I think, where Indigenous people emerged as real participants in public life, whether you like it or not. And I think this is it's powerful, right? It's so funny to me too, because a couple of years before I Don't Know More, I had done this huge grant proposal basically saying we should look at how First Nations are on Facebook. And because in BC, I'm sure it's the same where you guys are. It was so huge, right? Everybody's auntie is on Facebook. And at that time, this was a couple of years before I Don't Know More, the grant was pushed back to me. Basically, Indigenous people can't be online. I was like, wow, okay, so academia has the same problem, right? The same problem that newsrooms do in terms of thinking that Indigenous people are paying attention and have a strong voice.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I think this is the part of the show where you meet my dog. Oh, here he comes. He just came downstairs. So I just apologize if you see a dog that comes warming up. But yeah, I don't know. Like, it was also so tough though, even though I Don't Know More did change things and open doors, but it did make us prouder and stronger, and able to stand up a little bit more. I remember at the Star, getting the word Indigenous was a big deal. and to use the word Indigenous. And I remember going by a copy editor's desk one night, and they kept sticking the word Native in the headlines of my stories, like, Native leader, Native this, Native that, and it would drive me bananas. And I would always say, could you please change that? We would like First Nations. And usually the desk person would always do that. But then the part of a problem is that newsrooms always look at style, and they say, well, that's not our style, right? Our style guide is this. And so you have to wait to change the style for how things are going to be phrased or used. And I got to say, kudos to Anthony Collins at the Star, who really took that upon himself and to get that together. And we got a little team together with Lenny Carpenter and Duncan McHugh to help rewrite our style guide.
Wow.
Yeah. But it's, and that was after Idle No More, it was after the TRC, that was what, 2016 maybe?
When I worked at the Canadian Press in the late 90s, early 2000s, I worked with a really good team of journalists there, all of whom were white, but I shouldn't say all of them were really good. The majority of them were really good. The ones that I worked with on the desk were. And they would, if I spoke to them and talked to them about language, they would listen to me. And so I was grateful for that. And, it was a handful of people. It was like maybe 6 people, right? Mm-hmm. So I was grateful for that. And then when I was working at CBC and I was with CBC Music when they changed over from Radio 3 to and they launched the website and everything, and they became CBC Music. They let me determine the language. And so I used first Aboriginal and then Indigenous. And to CBC Music's credit, we actually started capitalizing Indigenous and Aboriginal before CBC News did. And CBC News capitalized it. Let's see, I worked for CBC Music for, I don't know, like a couple of years maybe. And then I left for 18 months, and then I got the call back. And then sometime between around 2013, 2014, maybe, that's when CBC started. They changed to Indigenous, and then they started capitalizing it as well. And that was work, again, done by people like Duncan McHugh, myself, Connie Walker, Bob Gishig Rice was probably still there. Maybe it was still even there when we started capitalizing it. I can't remember.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I just want to ask a question. Why is it, do you think, that so many of us leave mainstream, leave that comfort? Like look at all of us here. We're all independent. We are. Like, I'm starting a new column at the Globe, but I'm on contract in September, and that was a choice too. Because and I'm grateful to the Globe for giving me a chance to have a voice, because it's also important that we reach non-Indigenous people, I do believe. But it gives us more flexibility, right, Brandi? Like what you were saying, it's like you're not as constrained. You can do all those other things that you wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just like you were saying with Idle No More, right? Like when I think about that event, I think that was one of the next big events that really united us and gave us a voice and told us like how connected we are and how strong we are to make change and to have a voice. And so for me, being independent, like I think why we choose to leave mainstream media is because like they're never going to give us our voice. Like just thinking about Idle No More, that barely made the headlines in mainstream media. Like APTN's national news at the 6 o'clock news was, why isn't mainstream media covering Idle No More? Like,
right? Yeah.
And this is like happening across North America. Right?
They were.
major rallies and people are uniting, and like our own public broadcaster is barely covering it. Like, thank God we had APTN to get all that footage and to get all those interviews. But I think that that's one of the reasons why people get frustrated with mainstream media and say, forget it, I'll take my chances as a freelancer and get my voice out there and my community's voice and the stories that are important to me, when, you know, mainstream media is not seeing any importance in our standing up for ourselves and speaking our voice. Like, it's just not a priority.
We get tired. I think we get really tired of having to fight to tell the stories that we want to tell, to convince the editors and the producers, the gatekeepers, of why these stories are important. And it, you know, it becomes exhausting. You're like, okay, I'm gonna go do something else now. Right? And it also relates. Yeah, it also relates to, okay, well, I'm an associate producer. I should be a producer or a senior producer now. Like, I've been at this for 22 plus years. I have mentored, I have edited, I have led other newsrooms, but you know, if you can't see my worth, then I have to move on now. It's time. And I think that's why people do it. And microaggressions, right? The daily microaggressions that you have to endure in a newsroom.
So true.
Can I just give a shout out? Like, I work with multiple different publications and stuff right now, but the National Observer in Canada, they have a series that they've been running called First Nations Forward, and Emily Gillespie has been overseeing that, but her and I have been working on it mostly together, and the National Observer has been like incredible. They are like wanting to decolonize that narrative, and they just give us that freedom, which is amazing. It's not something that I've seen very often. So, and also Al Jazeera, they've been unreal. Like, they're an international market. They're hungry for our stories, and they give me that freedom. And one of my editors that I work with there, it's so cool. She's half Qataran and half she's Indigenous to Alaska. So she's got this really like incredible perspective and mix to bring to the table. And then we work with a couple of other women that have expertise in their field. But it's really like encouraging and refreshing that they are giving us that like international platform and giving us that freedom, because our voices like are needed. Like, we have Canada like committing human rights violations against our people here, and the rest of the world has no clue what's going on. Actually, most of Canada doesn't even have an idea what's actually going on here, right? So to be given those opportunities, like, there is headway being made, and the newsrooms like are starting to change, and I just feel so grateful. I can't imagine being in your shoes where you were all those years ago. I think I probably been pretty upset, and I don't know how long I'd be able to have endured that. So just thank you for being resilient, and, you know, keep, you know, the work that you did, so that that way can start to be cleared for us to do this.
Miigwech, I think I'm going to say Miigwech for all of us, because all of us here have, you know, Brandi, I think maybe you're younger than we are, and the rest of us, I hate to throw you all together with me, but we're all of the same vintage.
Yeah, we're all good.
Yes, we are. Yeah. And so,
like a fine wine, better with age.
That's right. That's true. We are better with age. Now, we're those aunties. We're the aunties that are like, you know, looking out for everybody else. That's so true.
That's your next series, Newsroom Aunties.
So where we just drink wine and pull apart the daily newscasts.
That's right. We have a crisis hotline. Can call in.
That is actually needed when you're a freelancer and you don't have that support. When we're working out there on the front lines on our own,
Yep.
I have a couple of people that I go to, and sometimes, I have my editors and they're amazing, but if they're non-Indigenous, they don't get it. So that is something that like is needed. And I have like my former boss at APTN, Karen Polize.
Oh yeah, she's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, she's amazing. So I can, reach out to her and things like that. And just to have other people to look up to and connect with. I even reached out to Tanya when I was in Smithers last week, about a story. And it was just so comforting to talk to her on the phone, to know that she understood. She understood like what in that way of what I wanted to do, and that we were at the same level, so it's needed.
Yeah. Well, you're awesome, Brandi. You're out there and you're doing the work, right? Like we all do the work in different ways, but you're out there on the ground doing the work and collecting those stories that nobody is wanting sometimes, and that's the thing too. It's harder when you're on your own, because when you work for a mainstream or for a legacy media institution, they have their own plans too, right? They've got their own story ideas that they want you to follow and do. But it's like what you were saying too, or Jolene was saying, there's a paycheck, right? There's comfort and security with a paycheck. And it takes a lot of guts to say, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to go on my own. And Brandi, that's what you're doing. And Kim and Jolene. And, it's not easy, right? Because like we all have responsibilities and we all have to eat. And sometimes
do you think that's a colonial tactic though, from putting us in those boxes and having to, like, for us having to choose between a paycheck and really telling the stories that need to be told?
I think for a long time they just didn't care. They just didn't see the stories, right? They just didn't get it. It wasn't part of their purview. I talked to Senator Sinclair. I have talked to him about this before, and I know I brought him up actually a few times today with various people I've been talking to. But I always say, like, sometimes I get so angry because when I go out and I talk about Seven Fallen Feathers or All Our Relations, and at the end of an evening, someone will come up to me and they'll say, I had no idea. Usually an older white person will say, I had no idea what was happening behind the walls of that school, or I had no idea what was happening at the end of my street, or that children were being taken away with a part of a 60 scoop. And I get so mad, and I wanted to say, how could you not know? Like, just so pissed. And I told that to Murray, and he said, don't be angry. He goes, don't be angry, because they weren't taught. None of this was talked about in the schools. None of this was talked about, you never learned about residential schools when we went to school. So non-Indigenous people didn't learn either. They didn't learn about the 60 scoop. So we've created in this country generations of lawmakers, police, editors, doctors, nurses that have no idea, because the Canadian state made it that way.
Yeah.
So we didn't have those curriculums. They didn't know. And I'm not letting anyone off the hook, and especially news organizations. I mean, how could it be that no news organizations were doing investigative stories on those schools? Where were those stories? All the abuses that were happening in the schools, or the kids being taken away? How come nobody did anything? As journalists, I think the Canadian media has so much to answer for. It's legacy media.
Wow.
Yeah. I was listening to the podcast with Rick Harp and Candis and Mary talking about your book. And in there, you talk about the book Seeing Red. And I ended up reading the paper, Bended Elbow. I think that maybe came before Seeing Red. And it just talks about how media upholds that colonial structure. The narrative is always the same. There's always civilization versus unruly barbaric Indians.
Yes.
And it's a perfect formula. And even here we are, 2020, I think they wrote the paper in 1974. I don't remember what year they wrote Seeing Red, but it's the same formula that you still see in today's stories, where they pit Indigenous people as, you know, barbaric. And
Yes.
Yeah, seeing red was such a huge gift. Carmen Robertson is a Métis scholar, and then and the other author is Mark Anderson. And that book, it really only came out in like 2011. And so I had already been teaching at the journalism school, the media ethics course, and I would devote one of my 3-hour lectures. You know, I get like 12 3-hour lectures. One just to educating students about representations of Indigenous people. And, you know, I would cobble together all these resources. And when Seeing Red came out, I would just have students read that. And they would just come in like just awash with shock and surprise, both at the kind of history of Canada that's in there. It starts at pre-Confederation, goes all the way to the present, you know, ends with actually the last chapter is about Margaret Wente and her columns, and the way in which she used sort of common sense to continue to perpetuate stereotypes of Indigenous people as, you know, degenerate, right? Like, I mean, this stuff, you really see the ways in which stereotypes are malleable and durable, and they persist over time, and they just kind of evolve. And I think that book just really made that argument in a profound way, especially to teach with. But I think it also did all this work for us. So we can continually point to that history and say, look, Canadian media has actively propped up the colonial status quo. How are you doing it now, right? How can you claim to be objective in the 1920s forward when exactly what Tanya said, they didn't report on residential schools. They didn't do the kind of work that served all of the public, right? And I think Indigenous people having a voice through social media and continually calling Canadian media to account for the kinds of, sort of still propping up the colonial status quo is so powerful. And you see it very often, right? I mean, when Tanya's column came out about her own paper that she worked for, going against the MMIWG report about genocide, I mean, that was a moment, right? Like, you know, even I just think about it and get kind of shivers, really realizing that everything that was in Seeing Red was still happening right up into the present. And we had, one national print Indigenous journalist that was able to counter it in their pages. That's where we're at still.
Can I just ask something? So I haven't read Seeing Red, so I'm going to. So what do you do, or what did you do when you were reporting on stories in your own communities or Indigenous stories, and you were labeled an activist because you were reporting on Indigenous stories and you're Indigenous?
Oh, one of my favorite questions.
Yeah, I love this question too.
That's the best question. You know what I say to that? So be it. You know, I think that we're telling the truth, right? People should be ashamed of themselves if they think that we are doing anything but being journalists that we are trained to be and to have been doing for years. I've been a journalist for almost 25 years. You know, I have got that label so many times, especially lately, and that I don't know what to say about that, other than, like, you know, in one way I'm just like, are you trying to insult me? Are you trying to say that my journalism doesn't mean as much as someone else's journalism that is more black and white, you know, more this way and that way? But we all bring our own biases to every single story that we write. I think, Candis, you were saying that somewhere too. You know, of course you were in The Reckoning. I mean, how could you not? How could I not bring my personal history into the stories that I write, or everybody here on this panel bring what's happened to them and their families? How do you not bring that part of your perspective? I mean, that's life.
And it's always, our stories have mostly been told through a white lens. And this, you know, and
totally.
It's about
and they're the ones that say you're an activist, you know, your story isn't as fair and as balanced as everyone else's story.
Yeah.
And I like to say that we are our truth tellers. We're telling the truth. You know, this is the truth too. You know, it's like, how are all of us on what we're doing, right? You know, this is through the power of our communities and the power of our ancestors and the little tiny voices in the back of your head that say, you got to go this way and you got to tell this story, because that's your role.
And language changes, right? Language changes. When I was working on Unreserved, we went to Standing Rock, and I referred to the activists there as water protectors. I called them water protectors, and I caught hell for that. And then they put me on.
Me too.
Yeah, they put me on News Network, and before I came on, there was like a panel or something, and they were saying activists, activists, activists. And then I came on, and I just straight out went, well, first of all, they're water protectors, and then continued to do my interview, and
Yes.
yeah, they weren't happy about that, but
You're just dropping those truth bombs, like Tanya said.
yeah, but then like sometime within this year, I heard a CBC reporter, and maybe she was the traffic reporter. There was a rally in Winnipeg, and she used the term water protectors. And I was like, oh, I wonder if she's going to get in trouble for that. And I was like, okay, well, see, like, it's okay that we evolve in our language and how we cover the stories, and evolve with the times. And I think part of legacy media is they're afraid to maybe embrace that change a bit, because if they're embracing the change, then and admitting that maybe we haven't done justice to the BIPOC staff, that then they're, I don't know, I think they're afraid to give up some of their power quite quickly.
Yeah.
I remember when I did a column, and it included Standing Rock activities, and I called it water protectors as well. And the manager afterwards was saying, like, if you ever cover those events again, it has to be activists, like or protesters. Like, you cannot call them water protectors. And I said, but no, they are. They're like, that's what they're doing. They're protecting the water. Yeah. And then like his trying to explain it to me was that it would be the same thing as if we were to talk about Nazis, and instead of calling them like Nazis, if we just said, they just have pride in who they are. And like he tried to give me the example that way, and I just thought, like, what? Wow. Like, how can you even bring the two together? Like, it just boggled my mind.
I think that Canada and the media too, like you were saying before, that they have painted our people, right, as a lot of times in situations when there's conflicts and things going on, they've actually painted our people as terrorists in our own land. Do you know what I mean? And they've militarized our people and created this concept of them that just doesn't help with anything. Even like on Monday, I was in Smithers, and I went with a wetsuit and had Hereditary Chief and his wife and his sister up to his territories to see some work that CGL was doing, their pipeline. And these are old people. He's 75, his sister's 78, like they're elders. And I heard them on the radio, because they have radios back and forth. It's a logging road. And then up in at CGL, where we went to the camp, they were radioing back and forth to each other that the protesters are coming. And I was stunned, because that's their traditional territories. Like, that's its inherent land. And I said, like, it's so disrespectful, but it really, like, it proves the ignorance and like lack of understanding within the cultures. And they've probably gotten a lot of those narratives from media, right?
Totally true.
I was just stunned. I was stunned. And that's why we need to be telling our stories, because we understand and we know these perspectives that they have no idea. Like, I was just like calling them protesters in their own land. I was just, it blew me away.
That's the education argument again, right? I mean, the need for you've got to start young. We've got to change all of our curriculums. They have to reflect the true history of this country, because those are the comments that come out of the school system that we all grew up in, right? The one that Murray Sinclair was talking to me about. And I got to say though too, Brandi, just picking up on that, about the use of the word protesters and them saying that. I remember when we worked on a series on murdered missing Indigenous women and girls. Kim, I know you did as well at CBC. And I remember looking back on all of these old stories, from the 1920s, the 30s, the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, they would call and reference our women, and young girls as party girls.
Yeah.
How can you be a party girl when you're 12? How can you, it was amazing. And these little tiny stories on our women that were found dead, accidental, that no investigation or investigations, and these little tiny stories, meanwhile, somebody else would die. If a white woman was dead, there would be these massive stories or missing. And then with ours, it would be these tiny little stories over and over again. And we went through all of them because it's a long story, but we tried to get the RCMP database that formed the report that they did. They wouldn't give it to us. So we went ahead and did our own database. And so I was reading through all of these stories. And I have to say that I was working just on your point too, Brandi, and Kim, actually, I was working with all the other journalists were non-Indigenous. And we worked on that for a year and a half. And by the end of that year and a half, their perspectives, they were amazing. They were so good, it was just, they were coming to me and asking me questions okay, all right, what? Okay, let's go over this again. Let's go over the lack of water. Let's go over the Indian Act. Let's go over this. There was change.
Not they're not interested. They are.
They just
don't know.
They just don't know. That doesn't give people a free pass though, right? I mean, but there isn't, they don't know. And that shows the value though of Indigenous people in newsrooms, because and Duncan talks about this a lot, in any newsroom you're in, since you're going to be the only Indigenous person, you have to be an educator as well. You take on that extra burden of, all we need to talk to an Indigenous person. Where's Tanya? Oh, there she is. Let's get a number. That happens probably to all of us all the time.
Well,
It's a heavy burden.
Yeah, didn't you say, or I thought I heard you say, or I might have read that when the Black Lives Matter movement was going on, that you were just getting a ton of calls all at once to be on media, and then it just kind of, because you were the token Indigenous journalist, that for them
it's just ridiculous. It's just it was a lot, and it was a lot. But I have to, I also do want to say something. Candis, you mentioned we should really shout out to Black female journalists who have led the way too, and very much have been holding us up, and that's very true. Yeah. That is really true. Even Marcy Ian has been amazing, and she's been someone who works in she's got a different show. She's got a show called The Social, but she's been let's bring on some Indigenous women. Let's get this going, and it takes a lot of us to sort of hold each other up.
Yeah.
I think there's some really powerful conversations, especially in the Canadian context.
Mm-hmm. Oh, is Candis free? Oh.
Can you not hear me?
There.
You froze for a minute. You were saying there's an important conversation to be had?
Yeah, no, I think in the Canadian context, there's a really amazing conversation going on between Black and Indigenous journalists, between Black and Indigenous activists. I think it's really cool to see. I got to interview Desmond Cole at UBC before COVID canceled everything. And it was amazing to be in conversation with someone who is so deeply aware of how similar experiences have been between Black and Indigenous communities in the Toronto area and actually across Canada, and really familiar with talking through colonialism and what the stakes are as a journalist. I mean, it was like one of the coolest conversations I've had with, somebody who just really got it and was talking from his own situated place, right? I think this is this conversation right here, I think, is why we argue in this book that we've written with Mary Lynn Young about how Indigenous journalists are really doing transformative work, right? Thinking through how language evolves, thinking through how to have conversations across Black and Indigenous communities. Like, I think this is really, where innovation is happening. And Brandi mentioned the National Observer. I would also say Ricochet Media, the Tyee and BC, the Narwhal, people who are really on the ground. And I'm always reminded to say Tanya and I are both on the board of the Narwhal. So, but these organizations are really committed to telling the kinds of stories that allow you to say things like water protector, or in the case of Wet'suwet'en people, land defender, who really take into account the deep shared history that we have, where, at least out here on the West Coast, we don't have a lot of treaties. We can't say we're treaty people. We are actually not treaty people for the most part, right? We're, we have a very different history with the state in terms of colonialism and our lands and rights and having to fight through the Supreme Court. And the Wet'suwet'en have really led the way. So calling them a land defender is like the most appropriate term for representing their deep and ongoing relationship with their lands and waters and non-humans, right? It's sort of it makes so much sense to invent language that better represents what it is that's happening on the ground, and yet there's so much pushback, right? There's so much resistance.
I feel like I have been able to I don't know if I want to say affect change here in Winnipeg with CBC Manitoba when it comes to language like activists, when they omit facts that, when they talk about women getting the right to vote, I always drop the managing editor an email and say this is inaccurate because Indigenous First Nations women didn't get that right to vote. When they call, they headline activist Buffy St. Marie, blah, blah, blah. It's, I'm like, oh God, you guys, come on. And they're like, well, it says it in her bio. It's like, but is that really who she is to begin with? Or is she the first Indigenous, the first lady of Indigenous music in this country, right? Like, let's hold her to the position she deserves and not minimize her to an activist. And because now I'm Joe Public, they have to pay attention to what I say when I write in, because the first step is to write to the managers, right, and ask for that change. And then if you're not satisfied, then it goes to the ombudsman, and nobody wants an ombudsman complaint. Right? And anyone can do that. We can do that. Any person can address that language and coverage with managers in all forms of media.
Can I just say, you ladies, since you've been working in this since the 90s, and you've seen the internet and social media come in and change the dynamics of everything, do you think that the influence of social media that we have as journalists in the work that we do also could be used to make those changes, Kim?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it can. And I think a lot has changed within the Indigenous community since the advent of Facebook, right? I always feel that Facebook has been the great connector in this country. when I lived in Edmonton, I'm sorry if you can hear giggling in the background. It's my daughter. They, you know, I remember working for a festival, and we were talking about the people we should bring in, and I had mentioned, well, maybe we should bring in Derek Miller or Eagle and Hawk, and they hadn't heard of them out there. And the same when we were in the East talking, they hadn't heard of the Western musicians, but because Facebook happened, we were able to connect more as Indigenous people in this country, and we weren't isolated and we weren't in silos, and it opened it up for people to really connect. And the same with Indigenous journalists. Like back in the maybe late 90s, maybe early 2000s, when Yahoo groups was still a thing, I created the Aboriginal Journalists Association of Canada, and went out and found a whole bunch of Indigenous journalists because I wanted to know who my peers were.
Wow.
And unfortunately, I missed Tanya in that, and I missed Candis in that. And I'm like, how did we not, like, if we all came up at the same time, how did we miss one another?
Is it still going?
No, it was, people have to be really involved and really motivated to keep things like that going. And when you're trying to survive in the newsroom, it's hard to keep.
That's why Facebook comes in. There's Indigenous Press Club. Who's all in that?
I think I'm on that. Yeah. It's important. It's important that we all keep together, I wanted to ask one thing before, because I see Ian's there, so he's probably going to shuffle us along pretty soon. But how do we make things different? How do we make change?
Well, I think what we're doing right here is making change, is taking a platform that, we might not have utilized before. Luckily for us that Ian and Jesse came up with the idea for Homies, and
we were guests.
Right, that we were guests, and that we had ideas, and we shared those ideas, and they let us, come in and help guide. And now we have Homies, the Sunday edition, that looks at news headlines.
And honestly, like if I didn't read columns by you, Tanya, or by Robert Jago or Alicia Elliott, I would have never had the courage to say, I'm going to pitch to a national paper to see if I can get a story on cultural appropriation told. Because after, working over a decade at a major broadcaster and not going nowhere, not being at all able to break through the glass ceiling, no matter what good critique I would have from, about the show or my performance or anything, knowing I couldn't go anywhere. If I didn't read articles by people before me, I would have never had the courage to pitch. So miigwech for being here.
Miigwech, my friend.
And yeah. And this is the one thing that I find different too, working on like with Indigenous women. And I feel like we are more uplifting of each other instead of trying to crawl to the top. It's like, no, there's no one's crawling to the top. There's no pyramid scheme. It's like, I'm up a step. Give me your hand and let me bring you with me.
And that's why, like, when I was putting this panel together, right, I saw Candis's credentials and I was like, holy man, how come I don't know who she is? And I've been following Brandi's career, and I was like, she's so young, yet she's published in like Elle magazine and
everywhere. Yeah.
And she's everywhere.
And any of this without you. I'm like so gushing right now, like to even be in this conversation with you. I'm so thankful.
Well, I feel like you're doing amazing work, and
you are, Brandi.
Thank you.
I wish I would have had that career when I was working in print, that I could, write for those big mainstream magazines. but the interest to tell our stories back then just wasn't there.
Candis?
Yeah, that's really true. The interest wasn't there. It was yeah, it's amazing to see your work, Brandi, and honestly, this conversation that Kim brought up about feeling ghettoized, I always felt that pressure to, not be pigeonholed into, being that Indigenous journalist. And now you see like Brandi and other young journalists who are really out there doing the work and doing Indigenous journalism and doing journalism indigenously. And it is really awesome. I'm really, it's pretty moving, actually. And like for me, I just see my work now as an academic as really trying to move method and move conversations and really continually say, like, as a journalist, you're propping up one social order or another. So start making some choices, right? And start looking at examples from Indigenous journalists who are, located, they come from somewhere and they have an accountability to the communities that they come from and to wider communities that they're part of. And so I think like those conversations kind of, get me actually a lot of pushback from the powers that be in journalism and in journalism education. But I think just, we just have to keep going and having these kinds of conversations. It's so amazing to be with all of you and talking about experiences. It means a lot. I've been, the only, like Duncan has taught a course at the School of Journalism, but I've really been the only full-time tenured faculty person and worked pretty hard to get to tenure too. So it's really, so I can say what I want.
And drag us all along to help say It's so true. Yeah, I just have to give one more.
Sorry.
Oh, DJ Indian, here he is.
I just want to jump in. Brandi, I know Brandi has to leave soon. So I just want to make sure, like, if there's any questions for Brandi specifically, like, we don't have to stop if you guys want to keep going. Please, by all means. I just want, like, I know Brandi has to leave, so I want to, if there's any particular questions, Brandi, is there anything you want to plug?
Yeah, so
is there anything
I have to go to my nephew's birthday. It's his 4th birthday. Otherwise, I'd totally want. I've been away for 2 weeks working on the road, so I got to get in that family downtime, right, to recharge. But it's just been like incredible to be here with you women. I'm honored, and I don't even know how I got here, but I'm so thankful and in awe of you.
Oh, we're in awe of you.
You wrote that, like, you got here because
I think I've already plugged the people that hello?
Yep.
Sorry?
You're a little
hello?
We're losing you a little bit.
Is anyone talking?
You're better now, though.
Okay. Were you going to say something, Kim, or am I?
No, you just said I don't know how I got here.
I've already plugged. I think. Yeah. So I have already plugged, I guess, the people, like the amazing editors and the opportunities that I have. I just want to like give them credit because you know what, they are standing and they're making that change. You know what I mean? So we got to talk about the good stuff that's happening too. And just thank you so much. And thank you, Ian, for having me here. Your show's amazing. I'm excited to see how this is going to blow up. I can see this like Indigenous online media, powerhouse. So it's awesome. Thank you.
Well,
thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it, Brandi.
You have to come back, Brandi. You have to come back. Yeah.
Yes. Hi. Thank you.
It was nice to see you in person and not just reading your stories online.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think that she said, I don't know how we got here or how she got here. It's like, oh my God, I've read all your stuff. We know how you got here.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, you're so good. You're so good. Yeah. I think that this is probably a good time for us all to, that was a good sort of ending, I think, with if there's anything else anyone wanted to say. I liked your comment about family downtime. It's like,
there's a few questions,
is there?
if you don't mind. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right? Is
Yo,
that
people have been
boring,
asking a lot of
everyone? I'm so
questions, but
sorry.
your conversation
We all know
has
how
been
technically
so good.
challenged I am, though, right?
No,
Yeah.
no.
Okay. Well, let's let Ian take over and post up the questions.
No.
And
Yeah. Here's one. In 1967, Maclean's told the tragic tale of Chownie Wenjack, an Indigenous boy who died after running away from his residential school in Northern Ontario. Gord Downey had explained that this story is the inspiration for a Secret Path project. Why no follow-up of mainstream media? Certainly they knew. This is a good one from Vanessa. Within media, is there training on identifying those stereotypes, prejudice, and racist colonial narratives, and more importantly, the truth, those counter narratives that directly address the myths of meritocracy and denial of colonialism and active pathologizing of Indigenous people? And also, Vanessa said hi to you, Candis, as
Hey,
I think I met both of you
Vanessa.
at the same event.
That's right. That's awesome.
I feel like Candice needs to take that question.
I think so. That's a Candis question right there.
Yeah. Well, the simple answer is no. I mean, I don't know very many newsrooms that do this kind of training. You know, I think APTN just has punched above its weight since the moment it came on the scene, and it's gotten very little recognition. And at the same time has been used by a scapegoat by many of the mainstream legacy media to not have to do the Indigenous stuff because APTN's got it. And first of all, APTN does amazing work. And, you know, even the Public Policy Forum did this big crisis report called The Shattered Mirror. It was a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And it's the basis on which the Canadian government agreed to give, you know, $600 million to media to make it do better, you know, to prop it up and help it, you know, in this moment of economic and technological crises. And so, you know, that Shattered Mirror report, it didn't mention APTN, I should say. Like it didn't count as like, you know, a part of the Canadian media landscape. So it's really truly alternative media. Ethnic media is the same. Like I think people from South Asian communities might say the same thing, that their communities papers and media. So we really need to think differently about media, first of all. And second of all, like really think about how legacy and, you know, what we call mainstream media might really begin to self-educate. And, you know, partly why I do the talks and write the stuff I do is to just continually have those conversations. And I think young people really get it. Like, I think the younger journalists out there are pretty amazing. I did the student journalism conference. Sorry, that's my dog. Okay, so there's someone at the door. Hopefully he'll drop the package. So he just left. Yeah, so I did this student journalism conference, and you know who they had as their keynote speakers? It was me, Ryan McMahon, and Garth Mullins, who does the crack.
Yeah, we had him on the show.
Yeah. So the three, that's who young journalists wanted to hear from, which I think really says a lot about where young journalists are coming from and where they want to go. I have a lot of faith in the youth.
Yeah.
Well, we have to because we're old. It's like, we have no choice at this point.
Yeah, but it says what kind of stories they want to tell, right? And how they want to tell it.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, go ahead, Ian.
For sure. One last question again from Vanessa. Yeah, sorry. This is from Vanessa again. It's too good not to ask, though. When you would pitch stories about Indigenous success and wellness and it was taken up, did you ever strategize with non-Indigenous allies to amplify or pitch these ideas on your behalf?
Absolutely not.
Is that a tactic that you've considered?
No, not at all. I didn't, because I didn't think anybody would buy into it. Even when I was working on a radio show called Revision Quest, you know, it was a show that was based on comedy, that was myth busting, in, you know, Indigenous prejudices, I guess, or prejudices against Indigenous people. In the second season was when the TRC started up, and the first the first gathering was here in Winnipeg. And Lisa Meaches, who is a well-known television and film producer, who is also Indigenous, her and Senator Sinclair, who was Justice Sinclair back then, I think it was him and a couple other people came to speak to the senior editors in Manitoba, and they invited the Indigenous staff to come and talk to them, and they wanted to tell us what was going to be happening with the TRC. And Lisa shared her residential school story, and it was really powerful and it was really moving, and we both ended up like crying, and I left that meeting and I walked downstairs to my white senior producer of Revision Quest and said, I want my episode this season to be on residential schools. And, you know, he was like, well, that's not really our show. Like, how do you make residential schools funny? And I said, well, you don't. And I think we can step away from that format for this episode because this is a really important story to tell. And then I got pushed back from other members of the team who were also male and non-Indigenous. And then I said, you know what, then fine. I will make this episode on spec and I will do it on my own time. And if you guys don't like it, then you don't have to run it, and I'll still make whatever other episode you want me to make. And so I made the show, I made the episode, and it, you know, it's a testament to the stories that were shared on that. But it won a New York Festival's Silver Medal Award.
Wow.
Which is a big deal in radio, right? It's like the Oscars of radio, and yet they weren't sure they even wanted to tell this story. So yeah,
What a shame, right?
I've never
what a shame.
depended on non-Indigenous people to help me, uphold our stories ever.
Wow, incredible.
Oh, hey, I just fact checked myself. So the Shattered Mirror report does mention APTN 3 small times. But it's not a central thing. There we go.
I love that we're journalists and we would fact check ourselves.
Can I just also say that this is something that I also see different when it comes to like Indigenous stories. Like we've got no problem saying, oh, I made a mistake, let's correct it. But many times I have seen our history ignored or erased or whitewashed. And I've never, ever seen a producer or editor come back on and say, just a little correction to the story that we made. Ergo, in fact, just a little.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I got to say, this has been amazing. You know, I feel like we're all holding each other up, and that's a beautiful thing about our communities and about our people, right? And like, you know, the funny thing is too, I remember being on a panel with Nahani Fontaine and Jessica Wood from BC. And we all said the same thing. Nobody sort of like, none of us thought that this is where we would end up in life. You know, like it's kind of super weird. It's like, you know, and it's like you're playing a game of musical chairs and the lights have flipped on and you're the one sitting on the chair. And that's kind of how I always feel like, you know, I never planned to do any of this. But here we are, you know, and it's kind of our responsibility to push the other generation along and to get them going, because we're all not getting any younger. And so I thank you, because you know what, Gitche Miigwech to all of you, because without you, I wouldn't be here. And you helped me so much. And I don't say Miigwech enough, so Miigwech.
I feel the same way. I'm really grateful for, you know, doing what we're doing and continuing to be able to, you know, work in the industry, whether I'm sitting like sitting in a newsroom anymore. But I still consider myself a journalist. I will always be a journalist, but I will also be a storyteller. I will do what it takes to, uphold our people and share those stories.
Miigwech, Kim. Yeah. And miigwech, everyone.
This was
I think we're all gonna go lie down now.
We're all miigweched out.
Yeah.
All miigwech.
So I just wanted to say one thing. Thank you very much, miigwech, for having us. Sort of take over. We're kind of the behind the scenes folks, and we're not. We all put lipstick on tonight, or I
put eyeliner on.
It's like, yeah. And so I have to thank everyone for letting us do that, and also just to remind people that we're totally doing this on our own, and not to sound like a fundraising drive, but we have something that we just started called Patreon, so we could actually pay our producer, not me. Me and Jesse and Ian are totally volunteer, but we need to pay Jolene, we need to pay Kim, we need to pay a whole host of others that are behind the scenes. We're all women. It's kind of amazing too. And so that's my plug for Patreon to keep us going. For sure.
And plug Homies Sunday edition.
Oh yes, and if you want to listen to us continue, we'll be on Sunday. Myself and DJ Indian, there he is, and we have some special guests. I don't know if I can tell you who the guests are. Do you have to wait? We have to wait for the guests.
No, tell them so they'll come and watch the show Sunday morning.
Okay. So we've got some special people coming up on Sunday morning. We've got Natan Obed, the ITK, is going to be there. It's going to be here, and also Ian. We've got
Tara Hauska coming in to discuss the name change of the Washington NFL team. So I can't explain how amazing it is to be working with such a great team, but this has been incredible. I've been so privileged to just been a fly on the wall and listen to this fantastic conversation that needed to happen. This was incredible. Apchi miigwech for helping me host this week. I really, really appreciate you, Tanya, Kim, and Jolene. Candis, please come back. Anytime you want to come, you're more than welcome for any of our shows. Just please come back. This was a lot of fun. If you can share this out there, all of our listeners and watchers, if you can share this session, this is going to be up again soon on you can watch it again on all of the platforms. They already watched it, but it'll be on YouTube soon as well. Thank you so much for this amazing panel, everybody. I don't know what else to say. This was
so
amazing.
Awesome.
Thank you for including me.
Of course, man. You got a lot to say.
Do you guys have anything you want to plug before we say bye? I don't want to take anybody's, light away yet. Kim, do you have anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I'll plug my radio documentary on the 60 Scoop. So I was a 60 Scoop survivor, and if you want to take a listen to it, it is on the Doc Project on CBC Radio, online, wherever you find your podcasts, and it's called Blood Money. So check it out.
Beautiful.
Jolene, do you have anything you want to plug?
Tanya caught it with Sunday edition, 10 o'clock.
Hey,
I'll be backstage.
Candis, is there anything you want to plug?
The book, Reckoning Journalism's Limits and Possibilities. I also do the Media Indigena podcast, and I'm really proud of this little organization that Tanya and I are on the board of, the Narwhal. It's doing some pretty good work, and they have a great young Indigenous woman reporter. Pretty excited about work she's doing for them too. So Stephanie Wood.
Yeah, she's awesome.
Right.
Sorry, I just saw a comment go by that said, watch Canada Reads next week.
Okay.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because Jesse's book is on there.
Woohoo, Jesse.
Yeah. Tanya, is there anything you want to plug?
No, everyone join us on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock.
Yes.
Right on. Yeah, again, don't forget to watch Jesse Thistle on Monday. His book, From the Ashes, is being pitted against other books to win the supremacy of books, I think is the, how this works. I've never watched it. I don't know. I'm just kidding.
Like a cage match. Like a
Yeah. Anyways, brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody, and we'll come back and we'll do this again soon. Okay, bon appetit.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm